87 of Grace and Steel. I'm Kevin Steele.
And I'm Kevin Michael Grace.
President Donald Trump gave utilitarian reasons for banning transsexuals from serving in the American military. He tweeted, quote, "Our military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming victory and cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and disruption that transgender in the military would entail." Unquote. His opponents responded with the slogan, "Trans rights are human rights." But the left does not always make appeals to idealism. For instance, it demands that women break the so-called glass ceiling, that the countries of the West open their doors to newcomers, legal or otherwise, and that the world must be bound to ever tighter so-called free trade agreements are made on the grounds of utility and efficiency. Actions have consequences, and the consequences of the ongoing LGBT revolution are profound, both socially and economically. Isn't that right, Kevin?
I'm going to read from a story which I'm going to mention several times in this podcast. It's from The Walrus, September the 12th, 2011. The article is called Life After Death, 30 years after HIV/AIDS was first identified. After it decimated gay communities across the country, a new generation comes of age in its long shadow. And this is by someone called Michael Harris. Here's the relevant paragraph. Gay men, like anyone, are well aware that we ought to use condoms. Just as the more than 5 million smokers in this country realize that the benefits of nicotine are limited to momentary gratification. Just as the more than 2 million Canadian diabetics know that chocolate cake is a transitory pleasure with real consequences. We, none of us, live rational lives. Now, you'll recall that since the 1980s, smokers have been browbeaten with the charge that they are an unnecessary burden on the public purse, correct?
That was the main argument used to defeat smoking, yep.
Now, it's a false argument for this reason. It's been identified going back to the 70s or 80s, I believe first in a study by the Rand Corporation that Ober and Waugh mentioned. If smokers live 5 years less than everyone else, obviously these 5 years come at the end of life, and that's where the big medical spending is. Smokers are generally, they get lung cancer, perhaps, then they die. What that means is there's 5 years of medical costs and pension payments that they don't get. So this is actually a saving to the public purse.
Okay. Are you undermining the whole argument here for examining the costs of
No, I'm not. No, I'm not, because the difference is that male homosexuals are... they cost a lot of money throughout their entire lives. Now, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to focus on the costs of healthcare treatment and things like this. This is something you had mentioned earlier that I never took into account. You had mentioned this earlier in the week when we were discussing this topic, was that there's counseling costs at the early stages in their lives, right?
Well, this Walrus article talks about this fellow who was diagnosed with AIDS. And there's some facts here. So the pills. How many pills do you take each day? Now, the story says he doesn't have to pay for his meds, but the price is still printed on them. We count them up and find that his pills cost more than $8,000 a month.
Yeah, those are the figures that I saw.
Estimates of the lifetime cost of treating an HIV/AIDS patient run as high as $750,000, a fact that should make prevention campaigns look like a fiscal responsibility.
Yeah, on the low end, I saw $350,000. Then the low end from the CDC in 2009 or something like that. I may not have the year right, but yeah, the low end costs are over the lifetime about $350,000. So there's your range: $350,000 to $700,000.
Now, to talk about transgenders, because it's LGBT, right?
Mm-hmm.
And transgenderism is essentially a homosexual activity. Transgenderism is very expensive for many reasons, one of which is that their mental health costs are off the charts.
Mm-hmm.
These are not well people. Story in National Review, let's see, by Dan McLaughlin, July 26th, responding to the furor about Trump's ban. One study done in 2015 by the National Center for Transgender Equality found, for example, 53% of respondents aged 18 to 25 reported experiencing current serious psychological distress, compared to 10% of the general population. 40% of respondents have attempted suicide at some point in their life, compared to 4.6% in the U.S. population. 48% of respondents have seriously thought about killing themselves in the past year, compared to 4% of the U.S. population. And 82% have had serious thoughts about killing themselves at some point in their life. 29% of respondents reported illicit drug use, marijuana consumption, and or non-medical prescription drug use in the past month, nearly 3 times the rate in the U.S. population, which is 10%. The prevalence of HIV and AIDS have been found in prior research to be higher among transgender people than in the U.S. population. Now, the figure that I recall reading is that astonishingly for black transsexuals in the United States, 44% of them have HIV/AIDS.
Yeah, it was off the charts. Yeah, I remember seeing
it was off the charts. Yeah. Now, the argument was made. Strangely, the initial response to Trump's ban was, it's not that expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
They tried to. Yes, that's right. They tried to make a comparison to the outlay of the military for Viagra.
For Viagra, yes. And I am sick to death of this argument, which essentially is you can't complain about some stupid and wasteful policy because of all the other stupid and wasteful policies we're engaged in.
Yeah, that's right. Why can't we cut Viagra payments as well?
Now, here's a story from the authoritative Teen Vogue, which is on the cutting edge of pause these days, as you may have seen.
They have since the election, yeah.
November 24th, 2015, you won't believe how much it costs to be transgender in America. One trans woman details her personal journey. Okay. And here are the costs. Do you have a pen and paper handy?
You're not going to ask me to tally these up? Okay.
No, hormone therapy, $1,500 a year. And, that's for life. Right? Yeah. Gender reassignment surgery, $30,000 plus. Facial feminization surgery, $25,000 to $60,000. Breast augmentation, $5,000 to $10,000. So at the low end there, and leaving aside the hormone therapy, well, let's not leave aside the hormone therapy. If we talk about, let's say 30 years, right? 30 years, that's going to bring us up to $50,000. Okay. So breast augmentation, $5,000, that brings us up to $55,000. Facial feminization surgery, $25,000, so that brings us up to $80,000, right? And gender reassignment surgery, $30,000, which brings us up to $110,000. That's the low end. Now, the incredible suggestion has been made that would-be trans people were joining the United States military specifically so that Uncle Sam would pay these tremendous costs.
Yeah, the number everybody was bandying about was there are like 15,000 transgendered in the military, and a lot of people were discounting that number, but, if they are going to pay for the surgery, I can see a lot of them signing up. And, the way the military has been so paused, POZ, lately, I can see them being shuffled on through. We want to use the military as a giant recruitment center for transitioning transgendered. So maybe 15,000 is the right number. They all signed up to get free surgery and drugs, I should say. But that's just part of the issue. This has been going on for a long time. Not only do you have those costs there, another cost that really is tough to calculate in all of this is the loss of productivity. And I think that's part of what Trump was implying when he was talking about the other side of it. It wasn't just the Costs, it's the disruption. And that's the loss of productivity. Things that could be done other than this.
Well, I'll just...
should be kept in mind with all of them.
I'll mention in this regard, I got into it with Twitter with these people saying that, oh, you mentioned Bradley Manning, who became Chelsea Manning, who was a traitor and was sentenced, I believe, to 35 years in prison, and whose sentence was commuted by President Barack Obama. That in the court-martial of Bradley, now Chelsea Manning, the defense of sexual dysphoria was explicitly used to argue for diminished capacity.
Mm-hmm.
You can't hold me responsible, or at least fully responsible, for my treasonous activities because I was driven crazy by the fact that I was supposedly a woman in a man's body. Now, this is, with regard to these, the various indices, they're talking about mental health and drug use and the like, and of course, various, how should we say, non-optimal behaviors in this regard are very high amongst male homosexuals as well. The pause side will argue that's because of discrimination. Systemic discrimination and the discrimination that exists today. Fact is, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Now, we live in a society where there's certain things are no longer controversial. For instance, the Minister of Justice federally in this country showing up using an 11-year-old mutilated boy as a prop to argue for a bill that would criminalize dissent regarding the transgender agenda. And I'll just mention in that regard that we had this fellow, another broadcaster called Kevin Johnston, who was arrested recently in Ontario and charged with the offense under Criminal Code Section 319, communicating hatred. And just to let listeners know that I've seen the protections in Section 319. I've worked on law cases involving 319, and the protections are so vast, you would think that it would be very difficult to charge anyone. But since the Canadian Human Rights Commission, that the penalty, their ability to assess penalties was taken away from them, the move has gone into criminal charges now. And, I'm not going to make any predictions about anything I have to say here, but in Canada now, telling the truth about anything or all sorts of subjects is criminal or borderline criminal.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The country is lost. We know that. We understand it. But we will continue to, shall we say, not live by lies.
Not live by lies. Now, when we talk about AIDS, AIDS is a homosexual disease, and it was supposed to be everyone's disease. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Remember how the entire population of North America was scared to death in the 1980s, that if you sleep with someone, you're sleeping with everyone that person has slept with? Well, that turned out to be an outrageous lie, because if that were true, the whole world would have gotten AIDS and died of it, which was pretty much what the World Health Organization was suggesting in the mid-'80s.
That's true. Wild exaggerations.
That didn't happen. But, if we're looking at the costs of, it would be difficult to estimate how much has been spent on HIV/AIDS, say, in the United States since the beginning of the epidemic. But what are we looking at? Hundreds of billions of dollars?
30 years worth, yeah.
Yeah, maybe trillions of dollars. I recall that it was Tom Bethel who made the comment that AIDS is less of a disease and more of a government program. Because a lot of people in the medical profession and in the pharmaceutical industry, big pharma, and also those people in the caring, helping professions have made out very well by HIV/AIDS, and that continues to this day.
Yeah, there were aid agencies were going great guns over in Africa back when the population of Africa was declining. Do you remember that? Oh, no, it didn't decline.
Yeah, how about that?
Oh, what happened there?
Yeah, I think I was mentioning to you last week that about a decade ago, I had all these people saying very nasty things about me because I said that the AIDS epidemic in Africa was bogus.
Right.
Southern Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, was going to disappear. Instead, what's happened is the population has exploded and they are now flooding Europe.
No doubt due to all those free antivirals that we shipped over there. Anyways, that's not the real deal. The real deal is the cost over here, and that's what I think is going to be front and center in the culture war, are these costs that are going to be thrown about. Now, I know we've gone about 15 minutes into this podcast, and we haven't mentioned a great resource for this whole debate, and that is on the My Posting Career site, mpc.dot.com, the Institute for Advanced Homophobia. I just wanted to throw that in there before we went too long. We get a lot of information from them, and they are a great cataloging resource. Do you have any plugs for them, Kevin?
Well, no, it's I've learned a lot from it, but I can say that the facts about HIV/AIDS and the parlous medical condition of male homosexuals was made public in an article co-authored by none other than Pat Buchanan in the American Spectator back in the 1980s. I mean, It's a remarkable thing that these facts are easily available for people who want to know them, but few people want to know them.
No, that's a curious.
Here's what's curious, okay? That a disease strongly correlated to astounding levels of sexual promiscuity reaches North America and causes an epidemic and a panic. And the result is the triumph of the gay agenda.
Yeah. However, that isn't permanent. And that's one thing that this rollback from Trump on transgendered in the military has done, is woken everybody up to the idea is that the culture war is not over and the significant pushback is coming. Now, it may not come from Trump, but
I would also suggest people who are interested in this search. Well, we'll have a link to this. The Library of Hate, which was a now dormant or discontinued Twitter site.
Twitter account, yeah.
With hundreds or thousands of so-called hate facts, all meticulously containing citations.
Nothing unsourced. There's lots of reading here. Now, one of the things that the Institute of Advanced Homophobia has is chronicling the behaviors of homosexuals. And you've made the argument for a long time that, people don't want to know what the behavior. They want to think of them as your Will and Grace types, your sitcom gays.
Well, I used to write pieces for the National Catholic Register, and I was assigned a story by my editor, and it was all about how organized gays in Massachusetts, they were claiming that highway rest stop casual sex, anonymous casual sex was integral to the gay identity. And that the Massachusetts State Police cracking down on this was, of course, homophobic, and therefore it had to end. And talking about this with my editor, he explained that there was a serious problem with stories of this type, which is that if you don't go into detail about what it is these people do, the response from readers will be, why are you picking on these people?
Yeah, it doesn't bother me.
Yes, doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
Now, if you do, however, explain what these people do, typically you get two responses. One, that's not true. That couldn't possibly be true. No one would be that crazy. And the second most worrisome response is cancel my subscription. I don't pay good money to bring filth like this into my home.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. It's bury your head in the sand type of thing.
There were two books that I read in the 1980s, which had a great effect on me in this regard. And the first one was a book, which I'll talk a little bit about later, by Gabriel Rotello, a well-known gay writer, called Sexual Ecology. And the other one was by Larry Kramer, the legendary sainted founder of the Gay Men's Health Crisis and ACT UP. And it was a novel called Faggots, which was, sort of almost a roman à clef about gay behavior in New York City right before AIDS broke out. And I have to say that, if it hadn't been Larry Kramer who had written it, it wouldn't have been published. And the response would be, this is the blackest, foulest, most outrageous set of lies about gay men that's ever been published.
But as it was all verified.
Yeah, I don't, again, I don't want to disgust our listeners, but I highly recommend Rotello's book, which drew a furious response from organized gays. I'll just mention one thing which I found astounding and still do. There is a very popular sexual practice amongst male homosexuals that, as Rotello points out, was unknown in human history until the 1970s. Now, when you think about, all of the ways that people can do sexual things to one another, the idea that here we have something, again, quite popular, unknown in human history until the 1970s suggests, does it not, that it was unknown because it is obviously insane?
Quite possibly, yes. But it's a new genre, is it? Go ahead. What? You're not going to mention it. Is that what
no,
you're saying?
I don't want to. It just people,
okay. We're kind of in the same position then that your editor is in. We could talk about how disgusting it is.
Well, let's just I don't want to be coy either.
Yeah.
Let's just say it involves one body part going into another body part, and this shouldn't be done. Okay, let's just put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. But there's a lot of that. I mean, this is the whole. Their counter argument is, "Oh, we're just like them," or "They're just like us." I think is the more the head in the sand argument, right? Oh, these people, they're just like us. But of course they're not just like us. There's statistical differences in the number of sexual partners homosexuals have over heterosexuals.
Well, yeah, Rotello, this idea of I don't believe it. Rotello talks about this question of the number of sexual partners, heterosexuals versus homosexuals, male homosexuals. And we're talking about American men here. Mm-hmm. And if I recall correctly, he is referring to the study by the University of Chicago. Average number of sexual partners, heterosexual men in the United States over a lifetime, 6. Average number of sexual partners, homosexual men over a lifetime, 125. Now, Rotello explains that neither side believes these numbers.
Yeah.
That when heterosexual men are given this figure of 125, their response is overwhelmingly, that couldn't possibly be true. They're making it up. They're boasting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, conversely, when homosexual men are given the figure of 6, the response is exactly the same. That couldn't possibly be true. They're not telling the truth. They're being hypocrites, right?
Sure. But, they also argue that truck stop sex or random sex in parks is normal and part of their culture. Well, it's not part of the culture of heterosexuals.
Well, when this fellow Aaron Webster was beaten to death in Stanley Park, he was a teacher.
Stanley Park in
Vancouver. In Vancouver, he was fond of parking his car and then going to the park at dark, wearing only a pair of boots and having anonymous sex with a bunch of people. And now he was beaten to death by young people, not exactly for reasons of homophobia, just that these young people thought that this, what are these people running around naked having sex is disgusting, Now, the editor of the gay paper in in Vancouver, Extra, I believe it's called, wrote an essay at the time saying that the what was it? The 10-minute blowjob in the park is just as valuable as like a 20-year marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, I mean...
There's lots of those types of articles around, too, you know.
Yeah.
There's lots of that sort of equivalent stuff.
Yeah.
Which, you know, it's a head fake, really. You know, it's an attempt to justify their we're just like them or they're just like us arguments, right? They don't equate at all, and it's so evidently false.
Well, no, I'll just mention here are some hate facts from the Library of Hate. And I think it is important that people understand that this idea of Andrew Sullivan's virtually normal is an outrageous lie. Just like us, not even close. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
1/4 of gay men in America have had over 1,000 sexual partners. 43% of gay men have had over 500 partners. Gay men are 12 times more likely to use amphetamines than straight men. Gay men are 10 times more likely to use heroin than straight men. 10 to 15% of older homosexuals have had more than 1,000 sex partners. You see, this is one of the things that Rotello points out, that amongst heterosexual men, the older you get, the less likelihood of finding new sexual partners. Now, I would suspect that this has changed somewhat since his book came out 20 years ago, because you may have read about this explosion in sexually transmitted diseases amongst heterosexual people, older people, boomers.
Right. Yeah.
But I would argue that, you know, and this isn't the original idea of mine. Leading gays have boasted for years that the straights are copying us.
Okay. So you think this is a result of copying homosexual behavior, or?
Well, no, there's no question about it, because this idea that, you know, I remember Kingsley Amis wrote about this, that this idea of sexual fantasy, that the idea that, okay, so like imagine having sex with some 18-year-old girl or 16-year-old girl or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And then he's imagining the various stages, right? And, okay, so then the final stage is that she is in the room with you naked and wants to do it, and his reaction was terror. Because, well, why? This idea, why would someone I don't know want to have sex with me? It doesn't make any sense. And, you know, and men, you know, when you look at again, it's disgusting phrase here, glory holes, right? Which I first learned about at Langara College. A friend of mine was going to Langara College, and he told me about this in the early 70s, and I could scarcely believe that such a thing would exist, right?
Right.
But this idea, you know, with men, the idea is, oh, well, yeah, you just, you know, stick your penis in there and someone will take care of it. Now, the normal male reaction is, no, and I don't think so. You know, what if it gets, you know, like torn off or bitten off, or no, this crazy. Why would I do that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't even want to imagine that kind of crap. Well, earlier in the show, we were talking about HIV mostly, but, you know, there are other STDs that should be counted into this equation as well, because they cost a lot of money to treat as well. It's one statistic from the hate facts site, gay men, 1% of the population, account for 83% of syphilis cases. You know, that's just one of many. There's chlamydia, gonorrhea. I think gonorrhea made a resurgence there. There was the Zika virus as well that there wasn't pinned to homosexual behavior, but all the cases that in the United States, though they didn't like to talk about it, were from men that had traveled to Brazil for homosex as well. And then, of course, there's the female side of it that doesn't get talked about as much, but they have lesbians have a real problem with obesity. They're 2.5 times more likely than straight women to be obese, you know, and this causes all kinds of complications from diabetes to heart disease, et cetera, et cetera. They are, in fact, twice as likely as straight women to have eating disorders as well. All these factors, you know, these in a country like Canada, of course, with socialized medicine, you know, the costs of this type of thing are off the charts here. Now, down in the States, you know, the Medicaid is paying for a lot of this kind of stuff now. So, you know, the costs are going up and up and up.
Well, there's this phenomenon called bed death, which exists both amongst lesbians and male homosexuals. I mean, with a lot of lesbians, the sexual aspect of the relationship, I mean, it disappears. There's a famous joke which explains this, which I'm sure you've heard, and it goes like this: what does a lesbian bring on the second date? And the answer is a U-Haul. What does a gay man bring on the second date? And the answer is, what second date?
Yeah, well, they do have some stats for long-term relationships as well. I think that they kind of max out at 8 years for homosexual men for long-term relationships, and most of them are not faithful during that period either. They're off the charts for infidelity and compared to straight marriages. So again, another aspect where they're not like us, even though, you know, they've been pushing this idea, especially for gay marriage, you know, and
well, we've had this push for polyamory, right, lately, but it is traditional and is still very strong that fidelity is expected in marriages or relationships. That if you're living with a woman and you're cheating on her or she's cheating on you, the assumption is that this relationship is likely doomed.
Mm-hmm. Now, this stuff is all romantic, but there's obvious advantages physically and evolutionary for this type of behavior, I would suggest. Though, you know, I mean, it just the fact that you have healthy partners doing the job of raising children. That's the main evolutionary benefit.
There's a passage that's been quoted many times from one of these fellows who was with this group, the two blowhards. Remember them from the previous decade?
Oh, that goes way back. Yeah, okay.
So he's talking about this fellow that he knew, Michael Blowhard. And he was just, this person was giving a little potted history of his own sexuality. Let me present my own history of STDs from 1973, when I came out, to 1975. I only got mononucleosis and nonspecific urethritis, or NSU. In 1975, I got my first case of gonorrhea. Not bad, I thought. I'd had maybe 200 different partners, and I'd only gotten the clap twice. But then, moving from Boston to New York City, it all began to snowball. First came hepatitis A in 76, and then more gonorrhea and NSU. In 1977, I was diagnosed with amoebiasis, an intestinal parasite, hepatitis B, more gonorrhea, and NSU. In 1978, more amoebiasis, and my first case of Shigella, and of course, more gonorrhea. Then in 1979, hepatitis yet a third time, this time non-A, non-B, more intestinal parasites, adding Giardia this time, and an anal fissure, as well as my first case of syphilis. By 1981, I got some combinations of STDs each and every time I had sex. At age 27, I've had gonorrhea, syphilis, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, and hepatitis non-A, non-B, intestinal parasites, including amoebiasis, i.e. Historicia, Shigella, Giardia, herpes simplex types 1 and 2, venereal warts, mononucleosis, cytomegalovirus, and now cryptosporidiosis, for which there is no known cure.
Phew.
Now, you can imagine the medical costs of this, and you can also imagine the stress that this puts on antibiotics. And this is perhaps the nuclear option here. Now, here's I'm going to read from the Wikipedia précis about Rotello's book, Sexual Ecology. Rotello made a number of warnings and predictions, many of which to prove prescient and some not. He predicted that as new drugs effectively treated HIV, fear would abate and condom use would likely diminish, which has occurred. He predicted that treatment could become a form of prevention by lowering group infectivity, which has also occurred. But he warned that if gay men responded to the availability of treatment by increasing unsafe sex and increasing multi-partnerism, the phenomenon of so-called risk compensation, then the decline in infectivity could easily be outbalanced by a rise in the unsafe contact rate, leading to a continuing epidemic. This has also occurred. He warned that without lowering the contact rate, gay men would produce and maintain the highest incidence and prevalence of STD infections in the U.S., which has occurred. He also worried that such patterns of behavior would prompt the emergence of novel STD pathogens and drug-resistant forms of established STD pathogens. This has also occurred. However, Rotello also predicted that as HIV continued to spread among gay men, it might mutate into increasingly virulent or drug-resistant strains. Studies indicate that this is occurring, but has not so far reached levels that would alter the trajectory of the epidemic. And he predicted that as gay men continued to transmit HIV despite knowledge of how not to, mainstream society might withdraw some support for gay rights. In fact, polls show that the public belief that AIDS is the nation's most urgent health problem has declined from 38% to 7% since Sexual Ecology was published, and support for gay rights is at an all-time high. This is what, they call, my comment, what's called in Latin suppressio veri, the suppression of the truth. That is to say that if people knew the truth, the sort of things that we're talking about now, then support for gay rights would be much lower than they are now. Now, I haven't mentioned the blood crisis in Canada, where we don't have the Red Cross collecting blood anymore, because this was taken away from the Red Cross because homosexuals infected the blood supply in Canada. And then the Red Cross amazingly insisted on expending its stores of infected blood at a time when it had clean blood. And as is typical in Canada, no one went to prison for this.
It just happened. It wasn't anybody's fault, really.
Yes, and we have this continued push to allow gays to give blood.
Yeah, they were banned from it now. I think they actually are allowed to do it now. I wanted to make one observation here about our Prime Minister, who is well known throughout the world now for pushing gay rights, especially here in Canada. He's shown up at every gay pride parade that he possibly could. At least, he appears to want to hit the one where it's new every year. This year, the new one was Halifax. I hope he's considering upping transfer payments for health care to the provinces where he's pushed this agenda, because, costs are going to go up. So as long as the federal government is willing to ante up, well, okay. I guess we can accept his attendance at all these gay pride parades.
No, the federal government is never willing to ante up, and we see that similarly in immigration and taking in refugees, that, for instance, it's considered useful that these people learn to speak French and or English.
Mm-hmm.
And the federal government's attitude is that's none of our concern.
Right. Well, I have noticed in the States, at least anecdotally, I don't have the exact numbers, but Medicaid is paying more and more for the AIDS medications of people now. There are more programs. And of course, they have that Ryan White program, which pays an awful lot of expenses for AIDS. This is directly out of the federal coffers, I do believe.
Oh, yeah. The federal government of the United States pays an enormous amount directly, but there's something else that's been going on. And again, this is kind of remarkable. There has been a repeated push to expand the definition of what AIDS is.
In order to, have more coverage, to have more public dollars funneled that way?
Funding.
Is that what you're saying?
Funding. It's all just right. HIV plus the presence of something like 50 different things now. It's this was the disease. Well, in Africa, there were stories that people who'd been killed in auto accidents were claimed as AIDS victims. It's just that, there was a time there when if you added AIDS, if you mentioned the word AIDS, governments would say, well, how much money do you want? How much money do you want?
That's right. It was the foreign aid equivalent of climate change.
Now, I was looking at this story from LifeSite, pro-life site in Canada, about defending the blood supply. Now, this is from 2010, this subsidiary article here. The CDC, Centers for Disease Control, recently announced that the rate of new HIV diagnoses among MSM is 44 times higher than among other men, and the rate of primary and secondary syphilis is 46 times that of other men. In addition, there have been outbreaks of various forms of hepatitis, herpes, drug-resistant gonorrhea, cancer-causing human papillomavirus, cytomegalovirus, chlamydia plus MRSA, I don't know what that is, and a host of other diseases.
Okay.
Now, there's another thing. The chances of receiving HIV virus from a single sexual encounter with a infected man, it's quite low. Quite low. Which suggests that, what was that ridiculous movie, Philadelphia, with Tom Hanks?
Yeah, that's right. Where he wandered into a theater one time. He just made one mistake.
Yeah, he made one mistake. Yeah, well, that's not how it works. You got to do it over and over and over again.
Well, these are old untruths that you're talking about. Now, I'm wondering, we're saying like this is inevitable. Do you really think that this is the kind of culture war we're going to get into? I really want to get to that. I mean, are we going to be fighting the culture war on all these things, or are these things beyond reach now?
Are they? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I have been made something of a social leper because I smoke cigarettes. I am not costing the health service all of this money as a result of this. I am not constantly under medical treatment, to put it another way. I do not, I don't take any treatments, certainly not treatments that cost $100,000 a year. Right.
But that making of a pariah of smokers, that's taken a long time. It's taken a long time. Now, there are certain changes in the culture being wrought by the homosexuals themselves. One is that the death of these gay bars. I mean, this is, you pointed this out. This is actually happening not because of shunning of the public or the public disgust with their behavior. It's happening because they found alternatives.
Well, why do you need to pay for alcohol, and why do you need to have conversations with people, pretend to have conversations with people when all you want is to have it off right away?
Right, yeah. So Grindr comes along and everybody has a gay bar in their phone. Okay.
Again, to compare this to heterosexuals, you will recall, before the email programs got better at shielding you from junk, you used to get all these emails that claimed that, some woman or women in your neighborhood wanted to have sex with you. And I thought, why would some woman, living 3.4 miles away want to have sex with me? And even if she put it to me that she wanted to have sex with me, and even if she were, attractive enough for my needs in that regard, my reaction would likely be fear. Like, is there going to be a group of men there that are going to, beat me or rob me because it's just not natural.
Right.
I mean, even the bar scene, the heterosexual bar scene, the way that it works is, hey baby, what are you drinking there? Another one of those fruity drinks for this woman. And then, there's a few hours of conversation. And then, you go to her place or your place, and maybe there's a little more conversation or whatever. There's some knowledge acquired of the other person.
Yeah, that's true. That's the Mr. Goodbar scenario that you're giving us there from the old movie Looking for Mr. Goodbar from the 70s. Yeah. Now, my point, though, that I was trying to get to in terms of the death of the gay bar because of the ubiquity of Grindr and things like that, was that, this speaks to a culture that is not very secure, that is actually very transitory if it could be wiped out so easily by an application. And, thinking back to the Stonewall riots when where a lot of people put the beginning of the militancy of gays too, that happened at a bar. That happened because they raided the bars. Well, if the bars all disappear, does it start disappearing as a social movement as well? That's what I'm wondering. I mean, if it's just, people using a website application.
No, I don't think so, because homosexual men are obsessed with sex. Mm-hmm. They are obsessed with sex. I mean, you have some men who talk about sex, often great regularity. Let's put it this way. Someone like Michel Houellebecq, he doesn't have anything on the gays. You think, man, that guy thinks about nothing but sex. Well, actually, he does think about some other things.
Right. Okay.
Now, we haven't talked about circuit parties and chemsex. Now, this tells me
tough stuff.
This tells me that we are close to reaching the end. It also suggests that
the end of what? Hang on.
No, that this is taken as far as it can go.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The idea that you have to drug yourself in order to continue to have sex again and again and again within a short period of time, it leads to the radical suggestion that these people are not actually interested in sex, that they're interested in something else.
Death, maybe?
Paraphilia. This idea that I am not doing what everyone else is doing. I'm different from everyone else. I'm a rebel, a renegade, whatever you want to say.
Outsider?
Now, I mean, we do see a similar thing among heterosexuals with Viagra, Cialis. I don't know what you see any of these commercials. Do you see them?
Well, you're talking about the mainstream stuff, the good morning stuff. Yeah, of course I've seen those. Those
now,
are
you may have noticed that the women in the Viagra and Cialis, and I forget what the third drug is called, that the women in these commercials are getting progressively younger and better looking. To the extent that a couple of years ago, there's some woman talking like this, right? And I was thinking, hey, pal, if you can't get it up for her, I think maybe you don't like women so much. Because why do you need a pill for that? Well, I know why they need a pill for that. Because Viagra, the use of Viagra has mutated. And Viagra is used to force orgasms out of men. This idea that, I could have 4 orgasms in a day. Well, why would I want 4 orgasms in a day, particularly when, I need to drug myself to have it?
Yeah, that's the 20-year-olds could do that kind of stuff, but
I mean,
20.
I mean, with the use of Viagra and Cialis or whatever, you see how sex becomes a grim duty.
Yeah. Is that a boomer thing? I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, you see this with this epidemic of STDs amongst boomers. I mean, what the idea is that, oh my God, I've only got like 20 years left or maybe 15 years left. And there's all that screwing that I missed. So I better do it now.
And all the kids are doing it. Jeez, why couldn't this happen when I was a kid?
Yeah, but the kids aren't doing it. Increasingly, the kids aren't doing it.
Yeah.
You see, the boomers grew up in a generation where, because of antibiotics and the birth control pill, just the first, guilt-free sex, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can have sex, not use a condom, nobody gets sick, nobody gets pregnant. And I think that
was the 70s.
That was the late 60s and the 70s. And you see, when that changed, it's like, well, what happened? Like, why did that get taken away from us? If I'd known that it was going to disappear, well, I would have worked a little harder.
Well, then you'd be dead, though. Because the ones who did work a little harder, they're the ones that contracted AIDS.
No, well, 70s. Yeah, I recall reading, Celia Farber had a long article in the last issue of Harper's that was edited by Lewis Lapham. And she pointed out that there, if I got this correctly, there's never been a confirmed case of a woman getting AIDS from heterosexual intercourse.
Yeah, I don't know if that's changed. Haven't seen any refutation of it, but I'll go looking for it if I can find something that.
I mean, I should mention here, well, this is a little off topic, but I have never bought the HIV/AIDS hypothesis. I think that Duesberg is right. We're looking at risky sexual behavior combined with a whole bunch of other risky behaviors at once.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what we're looking at. In essence, though, it doesn't really make much difference, except that a lot of people were killed by early treatment. It's not funny, but a lot of people were killed by early treatment of HIV. I mean, the drugs, AZT, other drugs that were used were so toxic that it was AZT that led to the famous, AIDS face.
Yeah, it wasn't AIDS itself. Yeah.
No, consent requires knowledge. And we can't have consent to the gay agenda and this idea, oh, well, no, it's all over. The victories have all been won. How come drag queens are showing up in children's libraries regularly now? You know,
well,
how come the big issue,
recruit, I guess.
The big issue in the province of Alberta is mandatory gay straight alliances in all schools, including religious schools and private schools. And, oh no, we can't tell the parents about this.
That's right. Yeah. Subverting families. That's
yes. And
agenda,
I can tell you my prediction for this, and I'm confident that I'm right in this, unless, the revolution happens soon, is that teachers are going to start putting it to students, I don't know, maybe going as young as kindergarten, that they can't say that they're not gay unless they've tried it.
That'll be the day.
And all of the conservative cuck politicians will get behind this. Let's just see how many of them. Let's see how many of them are bullied into marching into next year's gay pride parades. I think we're going to see a fair number of politicians who have never marched in one who will be marching because they have been forced into, their lust for power will have forced them into this.
Yeah, well, we've got that test coming up right here in my province with the newly formed Conservative Party out of the ashes of the old and out of the, I would say, strong trunk of the opposition party, the Wild Rose. They've now formed into a party, and we've got the Calgary Gay Pride Parade coming up here in August. Now, it probably will be something of a dismal affair because of the amount of money that's been sucked out of the province due to the oil price drop. But I think you're going to see a lot of politicians wasting taxpayers' dollars on this, so that'll be the test.
I think we'll wrap this up by talking about the future and why
sex dolls.
No. Well, no, I mean, that is the future as well. That just gets, what fresh new hell is this, right?
Right.
Why this is going to become particularly important, and one reason is that, we've run out of money, right?
Well, I think that's probably pushing a lot of it along, and, we've lost a lot of the carbon dividend, and in my area of the world, we've lost a lot of revenue from natural resources. So it's going to get tighter around here. What are we going to cut? We're going to cut senior care in order to keep treating STDs?
After 2008 revealed that the surplus that capitalism used to create is gone. And what we've done since 2008 is just for governments to borrow enormous amounts of money. Now, the argument has been made, which I tend to believe, that there has actually been no economic growth over the last 40 years or so, that it was simply the expansion of credit. Now, this was done privately, but we've seen since 2008 the governments just borrow. Now, with regard to healthcare, a friend of mine who was deputy chief of staff for the Premier of BC once told me that if current trends continue, that in British Columbia by something like 2030, 100% of the budget will be spent on education and healthcare, that there will be no money left for anyone else, that I don't think, you look at the situation with physician-assisted murder in this country, which was legalized by order of the Supreme Court. I don't think it's a coincidence that now we're going to have the medical profession killing people because it saves medical costs. But are we really going to find it acceptable that we're going to spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on the medical care of homosexuals who willingly expose themselves and others to dreadful risks which can be avoided? And we're going to have to kill old people in order to pay for that?
Yeah, these are the hard choices that are coming down the pipe. And that is what the culture war is going to be all about, isn't it? Who lives and who dies.
Well, there's also the issue of subsidy. Now, Canadian governments have been paying for, in one form or another, the costs of gender reassignment surgery for something like 30 years. Now, as we've seen in the last 5 years, for reasons which are rather murky, and I think which have largely to do with female brain gone insane, that transsexualism became something which, was exceedingly rare into something which is a fad. And, as we talked about at the top of the show, the costs, the direct costs are huge. The indirect costs, for instance, when transsexuals discover that the promises that were made about the new sexual organs that were made for them, that these organs don't really work. Mm-hmm. That suicide rates for these people, attempted suicide, mental health costs. We don't have the money for it, and we shouldn't be paying for it anyway. This, again, it is, I would like to see, a great historian write about this incredible event whereby AIDS led to the gays always winning, in the same way that 9/11 led to the Muslims always winning.
Right. Yeah, it's an odd phenomenon, but I don't think it's a permanent victory, and I don't think it lasts long. And I think that they win a victory, but the facts still exist, and that's what they're going to have to face down in this culture war. It didn't take much to revive the culture war, did it? Trump decides, okay, I need the wall, and these guys are demanding that I stop sponsoring transgendered in the military, and so they get it. Bang. Okay, and now it's on again.
Well, I haven't congratulated President Trump for this. I mentioned a few days ago, this is the first victory by our side in the culture wars since, ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's by no means complete, but it has got everybody talking about it again. And like I say, it can't be avoided. You won't be able to put your head in the sand about this. So Canada will probably attempt to and say, oh, it's all just Trump. But no, it's bubbling underneath in all of society, and society will be making harsher choices when it comes to realize that the money is running out. It's happened before. I saw it in the recession, in the late 80s, early 90s, in Alberta. Hard choices, and
people,
it's coming again.
People need to live together for their own mental health, just to put it that way, for their own peace of mind, for their own contentment. This sexual selfishness, which has led to outright savagery in things like circuit parties and chemsex, is obviously poison to society. And we have a choice to make, and we don't have much time left. Do we believe in society? Do we believe that society needs to be protected, needs to be reinforced, or are we simply going to give way to the devil? Because I think that's what the issue is here. If homosexuality, particularly male homosexuality, were just a different way of doing things some people like Coke, some people like Pepsi. If it were something like that, it wouldn't be that important. But, some of the things that we've mentioned during this program indicate how vastly different they are from us. And the gulf is barely imaginable. And as I suggested earlier, that's one of the reasons why people don't like to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I just mentioned one last example. That movie, Brokeback Mountain. That touching scene of the first sexual encounter between Heath Ledger and Toothy Tile.
I never saw it, sorry.
Okay, well, in real life, that would be...
Cowboys eating pudding.
Yeah, sorry. In real life, that would be exceedingly painful and, possibly dangerous. But we don't want to get into that whole thing, because the idea of cowboys having sexual intercourse is just so irresistible to the paused mind.
Okay. I guess we're going to wrap it up now. At this point, we've come to the end of episode 87 of Grace and Steel. I'm Kevin Steele.
And I'm Kevin and Michael Grace.